Hi sisters, Sheriff Charles here and welcome back to my YouTube channel. I'm kidding, we're not doing makeup today because I don't know how to do that. Hey guys, it's me again. Today I'm going to be starting on page 180 and ending on 198. This is going to be a while of me reading, so hopefully you can deal with me and hopefully I can deal with me for this amount of time. Also, I'm going to be listening to music, so if you can hear it, sorry not sorry. Anyways, let's just get started reading, I guess. The Johnson family were recent arrivals in their San Francisco community, a middle-class, middle-income real estate development high in the hills north of the city. On the afternoon of December 18, 1959, young Mrs. Johnson was expecting guests. 3 women of the neighborhood were coming by for coffee and cake and perhaps a game of cards. The hostess was tense. It would be the first time she had entertained in her new home. Now, while she was listening for the doorbell, she made a final tour, pausing to dispose of a speck of lint or alter an arrangement of Christmas poinsettias. The house, like the others on the slanting hillside street, was a conventional suburban ranch house, pleasant and commonplace. Mrs. Johnson loved it. She was in love with the redwood paneling, the wall-to-wall carpeting, the picture windows fore and aft, the view that the rear window provided, hills, valley, then sky and ocean, and she was proud of the small back garden. Her husband, by profession an insurance salesman, by inclination a carpenter, had built around it a white picket fence and inside it a house for the family dog and a sandbox and swings for the children. At the moment, all 4, dog, 2 little boys, and a girl, were playing there under a mild sky. She hoped they would be happy in the garden until the guests had gone. When the doorbell sounded and Miss Johnson went to the door, she was wearing what she considered her most becoming dress, a yellow knit that hugged her figure and heightened the pale tea shine of her Cherokee coloring and the blackness of her feather-bobbed hair. She opened the door, prepared to admit 3 neighbors. Instead, she discovered 2 strangers, men who tipped their hats and flipped open badge-studded billfolds. Mrs. Johnson, one of them said, "My name is Nye. This is Inspector Guthrie. We're attached to the San Francisco Police, and we've just received an inquiry from Kansas concerning your brother, Harry Edward Smith. It seems he hasn't been reporting to his parole officer, and we wondered if you could tell us anything of his present whereabouts." Mrs. Johnson was not distressed, and definitely not surprised. Mrs. Johnson was not distressed and definitely not surprised to learn that the police were once more interested in her brother's activities. What did upset her was the prospect of having guests arrive to find her being questioned by detectives. She said, "No, nothing. I haven't seen Perry in 4 years." "This is a serious matter, Mrs. Johnson," I said. "We'd like to talk it over." Having surrendered, having asked them in and offered them coffee, which was accepted, Mrs. Johnson said, "I haven't seen Perry in 4 years, or heard from him since he was paroled. Last summer when he came out of prison, he visited my father in Reno. In a letter, my father told me he was returning to Alaska and taking Perry with him. Then he wrote again in September, and he was very angry. He and Perry had quarreled and separated before they reached the border. Perry turned back. My father went on to Alaska alone." "And he hasn't written you since?" "No." "Then it's possible your brother may have joined him recently, within the last month." "I don't know. I don't care." "On bad terms?" "With Perry? Yes, I'm afraid of him." "But while he was in Lansing, you wrote him frequently, or so the Kansas authorities tell us," and I said. The second man, Inspector Guthrie, seemed content to occupy the sidelines. I wanted to help him. I hoped I might change a few of his ideas. Now I know better. The rights of other people mean nothing to Perry. He has no respect for anyone. "About friends, do you know any with whom he might be staying?" "Joe James," she said, and explained that James was a young Indian logger and fisherman who lived in the forest near Bellingham, Washington. No, she was not personally acquainted with him, but she understood that he and his family were generous people who had often been kind to Perry in the past. The only friend of Perry she had ever met was a young lady who had appeared on the Johnson's doorstep in June 1955, bringing with her a letter from Perry in which he introduced her as his wife. He said he was in trouble and asked if I would take care of his wife until he could send for her. The girl looked 20. It turned out she was 14. And of course she wasn't anyone's wife, but at the time I was taken in. I felt sorry for her and asked her to stay with us. She did, though not for long, less than a week. And when she left, she took our suitcases and everything they could hold. Most of my clothes and most of my husband's, the silver, even the kitchen clock. When this happened, where were you living? Denver. Have you ever lived in Fort Scott, Kansas? Never. I've never been to Kansas. Have you a sister who lives in Fort Scott? My sister is dead. My only sister. Nye smiled. He said, "You understand, Miss Johnson, we're working on the assumption that your brother will contact you, write or call, or come to see you. I hope not. As a matter of fact, he doesn't know we've moved. He thinks I'm still in Denver. Please, if you do find him, don't give him my address. I'm afraid." When you say that, is it because you think he might harm you, hurt you physically? She considered, and unable to decide, she said she didn't know. But I'm afraid of him. I always have been. He can seem so warm-hearted and sympathetic, gentle. He cries so easily. Sometimes music sets him off, and when he was a little boy, he used to cry because he thought a sunset was beautiful, or the moon. Oh, he can fool you. He can make you feel so sorry for him. The doorbell rang. Mrs. Johnson's reluctance to answer conveyed her dilemma, and Nye, who later wrote of her, throughout the interview she remained composed and most gracious, a person of exceptional character, reached for his brown snap brim. Sorry to have troubled you, Mrs. Johnson, but if you hear from Perry, we hope you'll have the good sense to call us. Ask for Inspector Guthrie. After the departure of the detectives, the composure that had impressed Nye faltered. A familiar despair impended. She fought it, delayed its full impact, and until the party was done and the guests had gone, until she fed the children and bathed them and heard their prayers. Then the mood, like the evening ocean fog now clouding the street lamps, closed around her. She had said she was afraid of Perry, and she was. But was it simply Perry she feared, or was it a configuration of which she was part? The terrible destinies that seemed promised the four children of Florence Buckskin and Tex John Smith. The eldest, the brother she loved, had shot himself, Fern had fallen out of a window, or jumped, and Perry was committed to violence, a criminal. So in a sense, she was the only survivor, and what tormented her was the thought that in time she, too, would be overwhelmed, go mad, or contract an incurable illness, or in a fire lose all she valued, home, husband, children. Her husband was away on a business trip, and when she was alone, she never thought of having a drink. But tonight she fixed a strong one, then lay down on her living room couch, a picture album propped against her knees. A photograph of her father dominated the first page, a studio portrait taken in 1922, the year of his marriage to the young Indian rodeo rider Mrs. Florence Buckskin. It was a photograph that invariably transfixed Mrs. Johnson. Because of it, she could understand why, when essentially they were so much matched. Her mother had married her father. The young man in the picture exhibited virile allure. Everything, the cocky tilt of his ginger-haired head, the squint in his left eye, as though he were sighting a target. Tiny cowboy scarf knotted round his throat was abundantly attractive. On the whole, Mrs. Johnson's attitude towards her father was ambivalent, but one aspect of him she had always respected, his fortitude. She well knew how eccentric he seemed to others. He seemed so to her, for that matter. All the same, he was a real man. He did things, did them easily. He could make a tree fall precisely where he wished. He could skin a bear, repair a watch, build a house, bake a cake, darn a sock, or catch a shot with a bent pin and a piece of string. Once he had survived a winter alone in the Alaskan wilderness. Alone. In Mrs. Johnson's opinion, that was how such men should live. Wives, children, a timid life are not for them. She turned over some pages of childhood snapshots, pictures made in Utah, Nevada, and Ohio and Oregon. The rodeo careers of Tex and Flo were finished, and the family, living in an old truck, roamed the country hunting work, a hard thing to find in 1933. Tex John Smith family picking berries in Oregon, 1933, was the caption under a snapshot of four barefooted children wearing overalls and cranky, uniformly fatigued expressions. Berries or stale bread soaked in sweet condensed milk was often all they had to eat. Barbara Johnson remembered that once the family had lived for days on rotten bananas, and that, as a result, Perry had gotten a colic. He had screamed all night, while Bobo, as Barbara was called, wept for fear he was dying. Bobo was 3 years older than Perry, and she adored him. He was her only toy, a doll she scrubbed and combed and kissed, and sometimes spanked. Here was a picture of the two together, bathing naked in a diamond-watered Colorado creek. The brother, a pot-bellied, sun-blackened Cupid, clutching his sister's hand and giggling, as though the tumbling stream contained ghostly tickling fingers. In another snapshot, Mrs. Johnson was unsure, but she thought probably it was taken at a remote Nevada ranch where the family was staying when a final battle between the parents, a terrifying contest in which horsewhips and scalding water and kerosene lamps were used as weapons, had brought the marriage to a stop. She and Perry are astride a pony, their heads are together, their cheeks touch. Beyond them, dry mountains burn. Later, when the children and their mother had gone to live in San Francisco, Bobo's love for the little boy weakened until it went quite away. He wasn't her baby anymore, but a wild thing, a thief, a robber. His first record arrest was on October 27, 1936, his 18th birthday. Ultimately, after several confinements in institutions and children's detention centers, he was returned to the custody of his father, and it was many years before Bobo saw him again, except in photographs that Tex John occasionally sent his other children. Pictures that, pasted above white inked captions, were part of the album's content. There's Perry, Dad, and their husky dog. Perry and Dad panning for gold. Perry bear hunting in Alaska. In this last, He was a fur-capped boy of 15 standing on snowshoes among snow-weighted trees, a rifle hooked under his arms. His face was drawn and the eyes were sad and very tired. And Mrs. Johnson, looking at the picture, was reminded of a scene that Perry had made once he had visited her in Denver. Indeed, it was the last time she had ever seen him, the spring of 1955. They were discussing his childhood with Tex John, and suddenly, Perry, who had too much to drink inside him, pushed her against the wall and held her there. I was his ninja, Perry said. That's all. Somebody who could work their guts out and never have to pay them one hot dime. No, Bobo, I'm talking. Shut up or I'll throw you in the river. Like once when I was walking across the bridge in Japan and a guy was standing there. I never saw him before. I just picked him up and threw him in the river. My God, he's wild. Please, Bobo, please listen. You think I like myself? Oh, the man I could have been. But that bastard never gave me a chance. He wouldn't let me go to school. Okay, I was a bad kid. But the time came I begged to go to school. I happen to have a brilliant mind, in case you don't know. A brilliant mind and talent plus. But no education because he didn't want me to learn anything. Only how to tote and carry for him. Dumb, ignorant. That's the way he wanted me to be. So that I could never escape him. But you, Bobo, you went to school. You and Jimmy and Fern. Every damn one of you got an education. Everybody but me. And I hate you, all of you, Dad and everybody. As though for his brother and sister's life had been a bed made of roses, maybe so if that meant cleaning up Mama's drunken vomit, if it meant never having anything nice to wear or enough to eat. Still, it was true, all three had finished high school. Jimmy, in fact, had graduated at the top of his class, an honor he owed entirely to his own willpower. That, Barbara Johnson felt, was what made his suicide so ominous. Strong character, high courage, hard work. It seemed that none of these were determining factors in the fates of Tex John's children. They shared a doom against which virtue was no defense. Not that Perry was virtuous, or Fern. When Fern was 14, she changed her name, and for the rest of her short life, she tried to justify the replacement, Joy. She was an easygoing girl, everybody's sweetheart. Rather too much everybody's, for she was partial to men, though somehow she hadn't much luck with them. Somehow, the kind of men she liked always let her down. Her mother had died in an alcoholic coma, and she was afraid to drink, yet she drank. Fern Joy was beginning the day with a bottle of beer. Then one summer night, she fell from a window of a hotel room. Falling, she struck a theater marquee, bounced off of it, and rolled under the wheels of a taxi. Above, in the vacated room, police found her shoes, a moneyless purse, an empty whiskey bottle. One could understand Fern and forgive her, but Jimmy was a different matter. Mrs. Johnson was looking at a picture of him in which he was dressed as a sailor. During the war, he had served in the Navy. Slender, a pale young seafarer with an elongated face of slightly dour saintliness. He stood with an arm around the waist of the girl he had married, and in Mrs. Johnson's estimation ought not to have, for they had nothing in common. The serious Jimmy and his teenage San Diego fleet follower whose glass beads reflected a long, faded sun. And yet what Jimmy had felt for her was beyond normal love. It was passion, a passion that was in part pathological. As for the girl, she must have loved him and loved him completely, or she would not have done as she did. If only Jimmy had believed that, or been capable of believing it. But jealousy imprisoned him. He was mortified by thoughts of the men she had slept with before their marriage, and was convinced, moreover, that she remained promiscuous, and that every time he went to sea, or even left her alone for the day, she betrayed him with a multitude of lovers, whose existence he unendingly demanded that she admit. Then she aimed a shotgun at a point between her eyes and pressed a trigger with her toe. When Jimmy found her, he didn't call the police. He picked her up and put her on the bed and lay down beside her. Sometime around dawn of the next day, he reloaded the gun and killed himself. Opposite the picture of Jimmy and his wife was a photograph of Perry in uniform. It had been clipped from a newspaper and was accompanied by a paragraph of text. Headquarters, United States Army, Alaska. Private Perry E. Smith, 23, 1st Army Korean combat veteran, to return to the Anchorage, Alaska area, is greeted by Captain Mason, Public Information Office, upon arrival at Elmendorf Air Force Base. Smith served 15 months with the 24th Division as a combat engineer. His trip from Seattle to Anchorage, I think Anchorage sounds cooler, so I'm going to say it like that, was a gift from Pacific Northern Airlines. Miss Lynn Marquise, airline hostess, smiles approval at welcome. Official U.S. Army photo. Captain Mason, with hand extended, is looking at Private Smith, but Private Smith is looking at the camera. In his expression, Mrs. Johnson saw, or imagined she saw, not gratitude, but arrogance, and in place of pride, immense conceit. It wasn't incredible that he had met a man on a bridge and thrown him off. Of course he had. She had never doubted it. She shut the album and switched on the television, but it did not console her. Suppose he did come. The detectives had found her. Why shouldn't Perry? He need not expect her to help him. She wouldn't even let him in. The front door was locked, but not the door to the garden. The garden was white with sea fog. It might have been an assembly of spirits. Mama and Jimmy affirmed. When Mrs. Johnson bolted the door, she had in mind the dead as well as the living. A cloud burst. Rain. Buckets of it. Dick ran. Perry ran too, but he could not run as fast. His legs were shorter and he was lugging the suitcase. Dick reached shelter, a barn near the highway, long before him. On leaving Omaha, after a night spent in a Salvation Army dormitory, the truck driver had given them a ride across the Nebraska border into Iowa. The past several hours, however, had found them afoot. The rain came when they were 16 miles north of an Iowa settlement called Tennville Junction. The barn was dark. Dick? Perry said. Over here, Dick said. He was sprawled on a bed of hay. Perry, drenched and shaking, dropped beside him. I'm so cold, he said, burrowing in the hay. I'm so cold I wouldn't give a damn if this caught fire and burned me alive. He was hungry, too. Starved. Last night they had dined on bowls of Salvation Army soup, and today the only nourishment they'd had was some chocolate bars and chewing gum that Dick had stolen from a drugstore candy counter. Any more Hershey? Perry asked. No, but there was still a pack of chewing gum. They divided it, then settled down to chewing it, each chomping on 2.5 sticks of double mint, Dick's favorite flavor. Perry preferred juicy fruit. Oh, lovely. Money was a problem. Their utter lack of it had led Dick to decide that their next move should be what Perry considered a crazy man stunt, a return to Kansas City. When Dick had first urged to return, Perry said, "You ought to see a doctor." Now, huddled together in the cold darkness, listening to the dark, cold rain, they resumed the argument. Now, huddled together in the cold darkness, listening to the dark, cold rain, they resumed the argument, Perry once more listing the dangers of such a move. For surely by this time Dick was wanted for a parole violation, if nothing more. But Dick was not to be dissuaded. Kansas City, he again insisted, was the only place he was certain he could successfully hang a lot of hot paper. Hell, I know we gotta be careful. I know they've got a warrant out because of the paper we hung before. But we'll move fast. One day. That'll do it. If we grab enough, maybe we ought to try Florida. Spend Christmas in Miami, stay the winter if it looks good. But Perry chewed his gum and shivered and sulked. Dick said, "What is it, honey? The other deal. Why the hell can't you forget it? They never made any connection. They never will." Perry said, "You could be wrong, and if you are, it means the corner." Neither one had ever before referred to the ultimate penalty in the state of Kansas, the gallows or death in the corner, as the inmates of Kansas State Penitentiary have named the shed that houses the equipment required to hang a man. Dick said, "The comedian, you kill me." He struck a match, intending to smoke a cigarette, but something seen by the light of the flaring match brought him to his feet and carried him across the barn to a cow stall. A car was parked inside the stall, a black and white two-door 1956 Chevrolet. The key was in the ignition. Dewey was determined to conceal from the civilian population any knowledge of a major break in the Clutter case, so determined that he decided to take in his confidence Garden City's two professional town criers, Bill Brown, editor of the Garden City Telegram, and Robert Well, manager of the local radio station, KIUL. In outlining the situation, Dewey emphasized his reasons for considering secrecy of the first importance. Remember, there's a possibility these men are innocent. It was a possibility too valid to dismiss. The informer, Floyd Wells, might easily have invented a story. Such tale-telling was not infrequently undertaken by prisoners who hoped to win a favor or attract official notice. But even if the man's every word was gospel, Dewey and his colleagues had not yet unearthed one bit of solid supporting evidence. Courtroom evidence. What did they consider that could not be interpreted as plausible, though exceptional coincidence? Just because Smith had traveled to Kansas to visit his friend Hickok, and just because Hickok possessed a gun of the caliber used to commit the crime, and just because the suspects had arranged a false alibi to account for their whereabouts the night of November 14th, they're not necessarily mass murderers. But we're pretty sure this is it. We all think so. If we didn't, we wouldn't have set up a 17-state alarm from I almost said Arkansas, from Arkansas to Oregon. But keep in mind, it could be years before we catch them. They may have separated or left the country. There's a chance they've gone to Alaska. Not hard to get lost in Alaska. The longer they're free, the less of a case we'll have. Frankly, as matters stand, we don't have much of a case anyhow. We kidnapped those sons of bitches. Wow, sons of bitches, and never be able to prove spit. Dewey did not exaggerate, except for 2 sets of boot prints, one bearing a diamond pattern and the other a cat's paw design. The slayers had left not a single clue. Since they seemed to take such care, they had undoubtedly got rid of the boots long ago. And the radio too, assuming that it was they who had stolen it, which was something Dewey still hesitated to do, for it appeared to him ludicrously inconsistent with the magnitude of the crime and the manifest cunning of the criminals, and inconceivable that these men had entered a house expecting to find a mighty filled safe, and then, not finding it, had thought it expedient to slaughter the family for perhaps a few dollars and a small portable radio. Without a confession, we'll never get a conviction, he said. That's my opinion. That's why we can't be too cautious. They think they've got away with it. Well, we don't want them to know any different. The safer the fill, the sooner we'll grab them. But the secrets are an unusual commodity in a town the size of Garden City. Anyone visiting the sheriff's office, 3 underfurnished, overcrowded rooms on the 3rd floor of the county courthouse, could detect an odd, almost sinister atmosphere. The hurry-scurry, the angry hum of recent weeks had departed. A quivering stillness now permeated the premises. Mrs. Richardson, the office secretary, and a very down-to-earth person, had acquired overnight a dainty lot of whispery, tiptoe mannerisms, and the men she served, the sheriff and his staff, Dewey and the imported team of KBI agents, crept about conversing in hushed tones. It was as though, like huntsmen hiding in a forest, they were afraid that any abrupt sound or movement would warn away approaching beasts. People talked. The Trelawny Warren Hotel, a coffee shop that Garden City businessmen treat as though it were a private club, was a murmuring cave of speculation and rumor. An eminent citizen, so one heard, was on the point of arrest. Or it was now known that the crime was the work of killers hired by enemies of the Kansas Wheat Growers Association, a progressive organization in which Mr. Clutter had played a large role. Of the many stories circulating, the most nearly accurate was contributed by a prominent car dealer who refused to disclose its source. Seems there's a man who worked for Herb way back yonder around 47 or 48. Ordinary ranch hand. Seems he went to prison, state prison, and while he was there he got to thinking what a rich man Herb was. So about a month ago, when they let him loose, the first thing he did was come on out here to rob and kill those people. But 7 miles westward, in the village of Holcomb, not a hint was heard of impending sensations. One reason being that for some, while the Clutter tragedy had been a banned topic at both of the community's principal gossip dispensaries, the post office and Hartman's Cafe. Myself, I don't want to hear another word, said Mrs. Hartman. I told them, we can't go on like this, distrusting everybody, scaring each other to death. What I say is, if you want to talk about it, stay out of my place. Mert Claire took quite as strong a stand. Folks come in here to buy a nickel's worth of postage and think they can spend the next 3 hours and 33 minutes turning the Clutters inside out, picking the wings off other people. Rattlesnakes, that's all they are. I don't have the time to listen. I'm in business. I'm a representative of the government of the United States. Anyway, it's morbid. Al Dewey and those hotshot cops from Topeka in Kansas City, supposed to be sharp as turpentine. But I don't know a soul who still thinks they've got a hell's chance of catching the one done it. So I say the same thing to do, shut up. You live until you die, and it doesn't matter how you go. Dead's dead. So I carry on like a sack full of sick cats just because Herb Clutter got his throat cut. Anyway, it's morbid. Polly Stringer from over at the schoolhouse? Polly Stringer was in here this morning. She said it's only now, after over a month, only now those kids are beginning to quiet down. Which made me think, what if they do arrest somebody? If they do, it's bound to be somebody everybody knows. And that would fan the fire for sure. Get the pot boiling just when it had started to cool off. Ask me, we've had enough excitement. Okay, well, she doesn't get to talk, so. It was early, not yet 9, and Perry was the first customer at the washateria, a self-service laundry. He opened his fat straw suitcase, extracted a wad of briefs and socks and shirts, some his, some Dick's, tossed them into a washer, and fed the machine a lead slug? A lead slug? We're gonna go with lead. One of many bought in Mexico. Perry was well acquainted with the working of such emporiums, having often patronized them, and happily, since usually he found it so relaxing, to sit quietly and watch clothes get clean. Not today. He was too apprehensive. Despite his warnings, Dick had worn out. Here they were, back in Kansas City, dead broke, to boot and driving a stolen car. All night they had raced the Iowa Chevrolet through thick rain, stopping twice as stiff in gas, both times with vehicles parked on the empty streets of small sleeping towns. This was Perry's job, one at which he judged himself absolutely tops. Just a short piece of rubber hose. That's my cross-country credit card. On reaching Kansas City at sunrise, the travelers had gone first to the airport, where in the men's laboratory they washed and shaved and brushed their teeth. 2 hours later, after a nap in the airport lounge, they returned to the city. It was then that Dick had dropped his partner at the washateria, promising to come back for him within the hour. When the laundry was clean and dry, Perry repacked his suitcase. It was past 10. Dick, supposedly off somewhere hanging paper, was overdue. He sat down to wait, choosing a bench on which, an arm's length away, a woman's purse rested, tempting him to snake his hand around inside it. But the appearance of its owner, the burliness of several women now employing the establishment's facilities, deterred him. Once when he was a running wild child in San Francisco, he and a chink... This is so racist! He and a chink kid, Tommy Chan, Tommy Lee, had worked together as a purse-snatching team. It amused Perry, cheered him up, to remember some of their escapades. Like one time we sneaked up on an old lady, really old, and Tommy grabbed her handbag. But she wouldn't let go. She was a regular tiger. The harder he tugged one way, the harder she tugged the other. Then she saw me and said, "Help me, help me!" And I said, "Hell, lady, I'm helping him!" and bopped her good. Oh my god, is this an old lady? If you don't learn anything else from me in these readings, you better learn to respect your elders. Put her on the pavement. 90 cents was all we got. I remember exactly. Went to a chink restaurant and ate ourselves under the table. Dude, why is Perry racist towards every race except Caucasian people? I don't understand. Things hadn't changed much. Perry was 20-odd years older and 100 pounds heavier, and yet his material situation had improved not at all. He was still, and wasn't it incredible, a person of intelligence, his talents, and urchin dependent, so to say, on stolen coins. The clock on the wall kept catching his eye. At 10:30 he began to worry. By 11 his legs were pulsing with pain, which was always with him, a sign of approaching panic. Bubbles in my blood. He ate an aspirin and tried to blot out, blur at least, the brilliantly vivid cavalcade? What was that? Okay, gliding across his mind, a procession of dire visions. Dick in the hands of the law, perhaps arrested while writing a phony check, or for committing a minor traffic violation, and found to be driving a hot car. Very likely, at this very instant Dick sat trapped inside a circle of redneck detectives, and they weren't discussing trivialities, bad checks or stolen automobiles. Murder was a topic, for somehow the connection that Dick had been so certain no one could make had been made. And right now, a carload of Kansas police were on their way to washateria. But no, he was imagining too much. Dick would never do that, spill his guts. Think of how often he had heard him say, "They can beat me blind, I'll never tell them anything." Of course, Dick was a blowhard. His toughness, as Perry had come to know, existed solely in situations where he unarguably had the upper hand. Suddenly, gratefully, he thought of less desperate reasons for Dick's prolonged absence. He'd gone to visit his parents, a risky thing to do, but Dick was devoted to them, or claimed to be. And last night during the long rainy ride, he had told Perry, "I'd sure like to see my folks. They wouldn't mention it. I mean, they wouldn't tell the parole officer, do anything to get us into trouble. Only I'm ashamed to. I'm afraid of what my mother would say about the checks and going off like we did. But I wish I could call them, hear how they are." However, that was not possible, for the Hickok home was without a telephone. Otherwise, Perry would have rung up to see if Perry was there. What? Otherwise, Perry would have rung up to see if Dick was there. There we go. I'm back. I left for like 20 minutes because I ran out of space on my SD card. Anyway, I'm back, so we're gonna keep reading. Another few minutes and he was again convinced that Dick was under arrest. His lead pains flared up, flashed through his body, and the laundry odors, the steamy stench, all at once sickened him, picked him up and propelled him out the door. He stood at the curb retching like a drunk with the dry heaves. Kansas City! Hadn't he known Kansas City was bad luck and begged Dick to keep away? Now, maybe now, Dick was sorry he hadn't listened, and he wondered, well, what about me? With a dime or two and a bunch of lead slugs in my pocket? Where could he go? Who would help him? Bobo? Fat chance! Her husband might. If Fred Johnson had followed his own inclination, he would have guaranteed employment for Perry after he left prison, thus helping him obtain a parole. But Bobo wouldn't permit it. She had said it would only lead to trouble and possibly danger. Then she had written to Perry to tell him precisely that. One fine day he'd pay her back, have a little fun, talk to her, advertise his abilities, spell out in detail the things he was capable of doing to people like her, Respectable people, safe and smug people, exactly like Bobo. Yes, let her know how dangerous he could be and watch her eyes. Surely that was worth a trip to Denver, which is what he'd do, go to Denver and visit the Johnsons. Fred Johnson would stake him to start a new life. He'd had to if he wanted ever to be rid of him. Then Dick came up to him at the curb. "Hey Perry," he said. "You sick?" The sound of Dick's voice was like an injection of some potent narcotic, a drug that, invading his veins, produced a delirium of colliding sensations, tension and relief, fury and affection. He advanced towards Dick with clenched fists. "You son of a bitch," he said. Dick grinned and said, "Come on, reading again." But explanations were in order. Apologies too, and over a bowl of chili at the Kansas City hash house that Dick liked best, the Eagle Buffet supplied him. "I'm sorry, honey. I knew you'd get the bends." Think I tangled with a bull, but I was having such a run of luck it seemed like I ought to let it ride. He explained that after leaving Perry, he had gone to meet the Markle Buick Company. The firm that had once employed him, hoping to find a set of license plates to substitute for the hazardous Iowa plates on the abducted Chevrolet. Nobody saw me come or go. Markle used to do a considerable wrecked car trade. Sure enough, out back there was a smashed up DeSoto with Kansas tags. And where were they now? On our buggy, pal. Pal? Who the frick says pal? Having made the switch, Dick had dropped the Iowa plates in a... I never knew how to say this name, but I'm going to go with municipal reservoir. Then he'd stopped at a filling station where a friend worked, a former high school classmate named Steve, and persuaded Steve to cash a check for $50, which was something he'd not done before. Rob a buddy. Well, he'd never see Steve again. He was cutting out of Kansas City tonight, this time really forever. So why not fleece a few old friends? With that in mind, he'd called on another ex-classmate, a drugstore clerk. The take was thereby increased to $75. Now, a list of places to hit. 6 or 7, starting right here, he said, meaning the Eagle Buffet, where everybody, the bartender and waiters, knew and liked him, and called him Pickles, in honor of his favorite food. Then Florida, here we come. How about it, honey? Didn't I promise you we'd spend Christmas in Miami? Just like all the millionaires. Dewey and his colleague, KBI agent Clarence Dunn, stood waiting for a free table in the trail room, looking around at the customary exhibit of lunch hour faces, soft-fleshed businessmen and wrenches with sun-branded coarse complexions. Dewey acknowledged particular acquaintances, the county coroner, Dr. Finn, the manager of the Warren Omaha, Harrison Smith, who had run for a county attorney last year and lost the election to Dwayne West, and also Herb W. Clutter, the owner of River Valley Farm and a member of Dewey's Sunday school class. Wait a minute, wasn't Herb Clutter dead? And hadn't Dewey attended his funeral? Yet there he was, sitting in the showroom's circular corner booth, his lively brown eyes, his square jaw, gentle good looks, unchanged by death. But Herb was not alone. Sharing the table are 2 young men, and Dewey, recognizing, nudged Agent Dunce. "Look." "Where?" "The corner." "I'll be damned." "Hickok and Smith." But the moment of recognition was mutual. Those boys smelled danger. Feet first, they crashed through the trail room's plate glass window, and with Dunce and Dewey leaping after them, sped along Main Street, past Palmer Jewelry, Nordstrom's, the Garden Cafe, then around the corner and down the depot and in and out, hide and seek among a congregation of white grain storage towers. Dewey drew a pistol, and so did Dunce, but as they took aim, the supernatural intervened. Abruptly, mysteriously, it was like a dream. Everyone was swimming. The pursued, the pursuers, stroking the awesome width of water that the Garden City Chamber of Commerce claims is the world's largest free pool. As the detectives drew abreast their quarry, why, once more, how did it happen? Could he be dreaming? The scene faded out and faded in upon another landscape. Valley View Cemetery, that gray and green island of tombs and trees and flowered paths, a restful, leafy, whispering oasis lying like a cool piece of cloud shape on the luminous wheat plains north of town. But now Dunce had disappeared, and Dewey was alone with the hunted men. Though he could not see them, he was certain they were hiding among the dead, crouching there behind a headstone, perhaps the headstone of his own father. Alvin Adams Dewey, September 6, 1879 through January 26, 1948. Gun drawn, he crept along the solemn lanes until, hearing laughter and tracing its sound, he saw that Hickok and Smith were not hiding at all, but standing astride the as yet unmarked mass grave of Herb and Bonnie and Nancy and Kenyon, standing legs apart, hands on hips, heads flung back, laughing. Dewey fired, and again and again. Neither man fell, though each had been shot through the heart 3 times. They simply rather slowly turned transparent, by degrees grew invisible, evaporated, though the loud laughter expanded until Dewey bowed before it, ran from it, filled with despair so mournfully intense that it awakened him. When he awoke, it was as though he were a feverish, frightened 10-year-old. His hair was wet, his shirt cold, damp, and clinging. The room, a room in the sheriff's office into which he'd locked himself before falling asleep at a desk, was jeweled with near darkness. Listening, he could hear Mrs. Richardson's telephone ringing in the adjacent office, but she was not there to answer it. The office was closed. On his way out, he walked past the ringing phone in determined indifference and then hesitated. It might be Mary, calling to ask if he was still working and should she wait dinner. Mr. A. Dewey, please. Kansas City calling. This is Mr. Dewey. Go ahead. Kansas City. Your party's on the line. Al? Brother Nye. Yes, brother? Get ready for some very big news. I'm ready. Our friends are here. Right here in Kansas City. How do you know? Well, they aren't exactly keeping it a secret. Hickok's written checks from one side of town to the other, using his own name. His own name? That must mean he doesn't plan to hang around long. Either that or he's feeling awful damn sure of himself. So, Smith's still with him? Oh, they're together okay, but driving a different car. A 1956 Chevy, black and white, two-door job. Kansas tags? Kansas tags. And listen, Al, are we lucky? They bought a television set, see? Hickok gave the salesman a check. Just as they were driving off, the guy had the sense to write down the license number. Jotted on the back of the check, Johnson County license 16212. Check the registration? Guess what? It's a stolen car. Undoubtedly, but the tags were definitely lifted. Our friends took them off a wrecked DeSoto in a KC garage. Know when? Yesterday morning. The boss, Logan Sanford, sent out an alert with the new license number and a description of the car. How about the Hickok farm? If they're still in the area, it seems to me sooner or later they'll go there. Don't worry, we're watching it. Al, I'm here. That's what I want for Christmas. All I want, to wrap this up. Wrap it up and sleep till New Year's. Wouldn't that be one hell of a present? Well, I hope you get it. Well, I hope we both do. Afterward, he crossed the darkening courthouse square, pensively scuffing through dry mounds of unraked leaves. Dewey wondered at his lack of elation. Why, when he now knew that the suspects were not forever lost in Alaska or Mexico or Timbuktu, and the next second an arrest might be made, why was it he felt none of the excitement he ought to feel? The dream was at fault, for the treadmill mood of it had lingered, making him question Nye's assertions, in a sense disbelieve them. He did not believe that Hickok and Smith would be caught in Kansas City. They were invulnerable. Okay, I'm not reading anymore for 2 weeks, I hope.